Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to our Learning Collective sessions. Today, we just wrapped up with Sarah Mercier's really insightful session for instructional designers, and it's still available on the page. So if you guys missed the live broadcast, it is still available for replay at any time. I am Ann Nguyen, marketing specialist with Risk Inc., and I'm really excited to introduce our next session with JD Dillon. So AI has been a buzzword for a number of years, and there are real-world applications for artificial intelligence now in marketing and in HR and safety. But what about learning and development? What about L&D? And JD is here to share with us today his insights and experiences and knowledge on how L&D can then get started with using AI. And before we go any further, for those who are not familiar with JD, I'm going to share a little bit of information about him. So JD Dillon is one of the most prolific authors and speakers in workplace learning. With his practical approach, JD helps organizations apply modern learning principles and achieve measurable results through employee development. For 20 years, JD has worked in operations and talent development with some of the world's most dynamic organizations, including Disney, Kaplan, Brambles, and AMC. He's now the chief learning architect with Exonify, where he collaborates with an award-winning team to build technology, content, and services that enable frontline employees around the globe to do their very best work every day. Welcome.
Thanks, Ann. Thanks for having me. Thanks to the Risk team for inviting me to be part of the Learning Collective, and thanks to anyone who's hanging out with us. So if you're here right now, you're awesome. If you're watching the recording, you're also cool.
Absolutely. That's why we wanted to make it accessible anytime. And if you are watching, catching either the replay or watching it live, feel free to drop in your comments and questions, and we'll make sure that it gets to JD. And then without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and bring up your presentation and yield the floor to you.
Thank you again so much. Hi, everybody. Let's chat AI. Before we do, given everything that's going on in the world, first of all, I'd like to thank everybody for taking the time to hang out, take the time to watch this video. Thank you for everything that you're doing in support of your communities, your organizations, and the people that you work with every day. So with that said, let's dive into a bit of a forward-facing topic, but a topic that's not as future-based as many people might think it is. So as so eloquently introduced by Ann, I'm JD. I'm the chief learning architect at a learning technology company in Canada called Exonify. I'm actually located in Orlando, Florida. And what we do is we build learning technology solutions primarily for frontline associates, so people who work, in example, in grocery environments, manufacturing, retail, those types of organizations. And what we do is we find ways to leverage technology to integrate learning and development into the daily working experience of a frontline associate. And a big part of that journey in our research and development in the applications we apply is the application of machine learning and artificial intelligence. So what I'd like to do today is kind of share perspective and how can we start thinking about artificial intelligence and learning and development. What does that actually mean? And what are some practical examples of what's going on, what type of technology is either being worked on or maybe already meaningfully applied in the space as we talk right now, with a couple examples from the work that my team is doing as well. So today we're going to talk about 4 particular ideas, and this is not entirely a technology conversation. So if you're not a technologist, this hopefully conversation can work for you as you start to think and contextualize the work that you do with this type of technology. It's also not a how to build artificial intelligence tools conversation. At the end of the presentation, I'll share a resource link where I curate information about AI, specifically as related to the workplace and learning and development, with some additional tools if you're looking to go deeper on any particular part of the conversation. But today we're going to focus on 4 areas. 1, mindset. So how should we approach this conversation? What's the right way to start thinking about the application of AI in learning and development? 2, applications. So what are some examples? How are organizations already applying this type of technology to improve the way that they support their employees? A big piece of this conversation is data. Where does our existing kind of measurement story and some of the challenges we have with data and learning and development fit into or potentially inhibit our ability to apply AI-enabled technology? And then preparation. So what do you do moving forward? So maybe you're a member of the team who's particularly interested in AI, you're doing some work on your own or maybe some homework or research. How do you start to move this conversation forward in your organization when maybe right now, how do we apply artificial intelligence and learning? It's probably not on the top of a lot of people's lists right now, given everything going on, but how do you maybe kickstart a conversation that can help kind of move forward some of the things that are bigger priorities in your business today? So the first question I always ask, and given that a lot of you might be watching the recording right now and can't answer live, I ask everyone when you start thinking about AI in learning and development is, why are you interested in AI at all? So what brought you to watch this video, brought you to attend this session, brought you to research this particular topic? Is it that AI is a trendy term and you're looking to learn more because you're hearing it come up and it's buzzy and it's starting to show up in different offerings and technologies in learning and development? Or have you been led here because you're looking to solve particular problems or looking for new ways to do what you do in terms of learning and development in your organization? So people are, I think, interested in this conversation for a variety of reasons, but it's important to really ground yourself in why. What's the depth of this conversation? Is it more than it's trendy? Is this an opportunity for you to advance your practices forward? And I hope that's the kind of the mindset you're starting to bring to this conversation. Equally important is to clarify this is not about robots. So there's a lot of kind of early applications or more familiar consumer applications of artificial intelligence. We think about things like smart assistants and the Alexas of the world. There's a lot of conversations around different types of robots and automation that relates to this type of technology. And we're not talking about robots or the future of learning as smart assistants or anything like that. What we're going to try to do is kind of ground how this type of technology can help us across a variety of different practices and things that we do in learning and development. So it's not a robot conversation, but it is a conversation that needs to be grounded in what artificial intelligence actually can do. So rather than go into the nuts and bolts of what AI is and what machine learning is and the kind of the terms and definitions, it's important to recognize that this is a discipline with decades of background and a lot of people way smarter than me who have been working on this for a long time to figure out how they can combine modern technology, computing capabilities with the right type of data in order to solve the right types of problems. So when you break AI down from an application perspective, you see that we're applying this type of technology just generally in the world to do certain types of things. On this list, pattern recognition is a big one. So if you start to think about what is AI, how should I think about it? Like, what does it do? Pattern recognition is a great place to start. The ability to provide a lot of data to a program, piece of software, and that software to be able to identify rapidly patterns and make from those patterns recommendations or provide insights in ways that we traditionally can't. As people, because we can only process so much information so quickly. So that ability for a machine to take a look at a lot of data and start to identify based on what it's programmed to do, where are the patterns or where are the insights to be gleaned from that data. That extends to a bunch of different other potential use cases or ways we're seeing AI used today, everything from natural language processing, so being able to not just look at keywords, but actually be able to contextualize spoken word or written text to figure out what does this actually mean and what can I do with this language. That relates to conversational response. So when you talk to a chatbot or you talk to Alexa and she answers back in a conversational manner, that's the ability to, again, contextualize your speech and figure out the right way to reply in a way that sounds natural and conversational. Also relates to the ability to, again, discover or to surface different types of information, again, based on the ability to understand context and not just kind of simple keyword ability. Visual recognition is something we see in a variety of different applications. One of the funniest ones out there, I don't know if anyone saw this meme, but there was a meme out there asking the question, could AI identify the difference between a chihuahua and a muffin? Because certain dogs' faces kind of look like blueberry muffins specifically. But that ability to feed a machine a lot of different images of a cat and define it, say, this is a cat, and then the machine can look at an image or a live video and say, that's a cat, because I can understand and recognize those patterns. Sentiment analysis to be able to figure out kind of the general sentiment or sense or feeling around a particular set of content. As an example, on Twitter, there are machines out there that can scrape Twitter and start to kind of understand, how seasonal affective disorder works, or how based on a certain time of year, what a certain region is feeling based on its ability to take a look at the text and understand the sentiment behind that text. And then we've already kind of mentioned text-to-speech or speech-to-text back and forth. If you use that on your smartphone as an example, and you notice that email is probably a better example, you're noticing that your email is getting really good at making recommendations for what the next text should be, and not just kind of generic stuff, but it's starting to sound like you. That's where some of this technology comes into play. So that's kind of a simple list of things that AI can do. And the question becomes, well, how can we apply some of these types of capabilities in the work that we're doing every day in learning? But before we get there, there's an important conversation I think we have to have, based largely on the history of learning and development, our profession, and kind of new technologies or kind of meaningful steps forward in terms of technology resources and how we've applied them. So before we can get to how we're going to use AI, we have to talk about boxes. Follow me on this one. So if you think back over the last couple of decades, there have been a couple kind of key pivot points or kind of, again, meaningful steps forward in terms of the availability of technology. And then the question that comes from that, which is, what are we going to do with it? How can we take advantage of this new technology that we didn't necessarily create in learning and development, but has now become available? How do we evolve our practices to be able to leverage this to accomplish our goal, which for me is just to help people do their jobs more effectively, solve problems more effectively, and advance their own capabilities forward. So how can we use technology to do that better? And those kind of meaningful pivot points were, one, the internet, 90s, early 2000s, social technology, which emerged in the mid 2000s, and then mobile technology, which became largely ubiquitous in the last 10 years. The iPhone came out in 2007, so that's a decent benchmark, even though it wasn't the first mobile device by any means. So the question is, how did we as an industry, and how do even you or I, take a look at these technologies and advance our practices? And I question if we did it as well as we could have. So what did we do with the internet? A lot of us took the internet as an opportunity to say, those courses we deliver in instructor-led training, let's put them on the internet. And now they're called e-learning. And now instead of everyone going to a room, they can click through the PowerPoint and do it at their own pace. And it's good times, right? So the question is, did we take advantage of what the internet really could do by advancing kind of the e-learning story as kind of a next version of instructor-led training? Social technology, have we figured that one out yet? Does social learning have a deep meaning in your organization? Are we still trying to figure out the implications of, the fact that we can engage in such a way in everyday life? How do we bring that to the workplace? I see a lot of organizations still struggling with that one. And the same is true of mobile. There's a bunch of us who just put mobile on, or courses on a phone back in the day. And I think we figured out that's not the solution, but have we figured out how to leverage devices, including the ones that people are just carrying around with them in their pockets every day, in order to help them do their jobs better? And I would say in a large case, we haven't. And I think part of the big problem is that we tend to isolate these topics, or we put these kind of new advances or new opportunities into boxes, and we give them names. We called it e-learning and social learning and mobile learning. But for me, the reality is that it's not about each of these being a new tool in our toolkit. It's about how do they fundamentally shift our overall practices, the way that we approach our work by leveraging these tools. And no, a mobile phone's not going to solve all the problems and be used in every potential solution that we provide, but it should fundamentally shift. That access point should shift a lot of the ways we think about how we can help people. So I think we lagged and continue to lag in the application of some of these kind of very meaningful steps forward in technology because we isolated them, as opposed to rethinking what workplace learning can be in a world where these types of technologies exist. And I struggle with the next inflection point, which I believe is AI. As AI-enabled technologies come to market, or you're able to take advantage of these types of tools, we can't put them in another box. We have to kind of come into this conversation thinking about our fundamentals and our practices and how we do what we do, and start to look at it through the lens of the resources we have and the technology we have. And the point of today's conversation is to hopefully help you do that when it comes to AI specifically. Now, how fast is AI moving? This is just one stat out there that said by next year, so by actually, I'm trying to remember when I wrote this. This might actually supposed to be by the end of this year, given the world. Let's say it's next year. So 75% of commercial applications using AI in some way over the course of the next year. What does that mean for learning and development? So there's no hard stat or research out there that says how quickly will all of the tools we use have AI-enabled capabilities in them. But based on my research, the work that my team does, and generally what I see in the space, I think we're looking at something to the effect of about 75% of the tools you generally use having some AI-enabled capability in them within the next 3 years. Any L&D technology, whether it's a rapid authoring tool, whether it's a learning management system or a learning experience platform, anyone who's got a research and development team kind of worth their salt is doing this research now and bringing these types of tools into the marketplace. And you're already starting to see AI put into marketing language or slapped on the side of a banner and things like that for different vendors. So the question is it real, and how do we take advantage of it? But I think it's not going to be a question for L&D of can we use or will we use AI? It's more a question of, as these tools become available and actually become part of the tools and enhance the capabilities of the tools we already have, how does that shift our practices, or how can we take better advantage of those tools once this type of capability becomes part of that? Because as someone who builds technology, I can tell you it's a competitive imperative to be able to solve certain types of problems more effectively, and this type of technology is going to help us get there. So that hopefully gives you a sense of where we are. We're already in the AI conversation in learning and development today, even if your team hasn't kind of sat down and said, how are we going to apply AI in the work that we do? It's already here. Now the question is, how do we pivot and adapt accordingly? So let's get to the point of kind of so what do we do with this? How can we apply AI within workplace learning? And the challenge is that's the wrong question. So we shouldn't come at it from the technology first. And that should be a familiar idea to most of us today, right? Because every time we come at things, technology is solution first, we tend to miss the mark because we don't really understand the context or what we were being asked to do. We led solution first. And we've all done that thing where we built a course and realized, well, course wasn't actually the right solution. We should have just built a job aid and saved a lot of time and resources. So how do we come at this topic with the right question? And the right question is not, how do we apply AI in workplace learning? The better question is, what problem are you trying to solve? So what are you being asked to do? Or when you look at the audience that you support, in my case, frontline employees, so people in grocery stores, as an example. My challenge is, how do I support grocery associates more effectively in helping them solve everyday problems, help them make better decisions on the job, keep themselves safe and productive, but also to help them develop towards their future goals if they want to take on a new role or advance in a different part of their career. Those are the types of problems I'm trying to solve. And then how do we back into, well, what tools and resources, technologies, content do we have, or what can we develop or acquire that's going to help us advance our solutions to those problems? So I don't know your life. I don't know exactly what problems you're trying to solve. So it's hard for me to say, here's how you should apply AI to solve those problems. So instead of doing that, let's take a look at a set of kind of advanced practices in AI, the types of things that are either already being used today that are in the marketplace, some of the work my team is doing, or different items that are kind of rife for disruption or application of this type of technology, given what AI is capable of doing. So everything you see on the screen here, we're going to dive into in a little bit of detail. Everything is either being worked on or is in kind of product mode in the marketplace today. It's hard for me to give you like concrete visual examples of here's AI working in an application today, but we'll speak to the ideas so that you can go looking for more detail, or maybe if you're working with a technology provider, you can ask them, hey, this is a problem I'm trying to solve. Is your team trying to solve it? Are you trying to apply any of these types of technologies to help me solve these problems? Because hopefully through this conversation, you kind of know what's out there, so you know what's realistic right now and into the immediate future. So let's dive in one by one. Let's start with kind of a low-hanging fruit, administration. So there's kind of a balancing act conversation here between what is really machine learning and artificial intelligence, the ability for a machine to take advantage of a lot of data and identify insights, take actions, solve a problem it's programmed to solve, but in ways that we can't necessarily predict or necessarily explain exactly how the box works. And then there's automation, which is the more simple execution of tasks as predicted. So those are two different ideas, but they both kind of converge here into the administration question. So there's a lot of things that you might spend your time on, or someone on your team spends their time on, that a machine might be better suited to do. As an example, should you manually have to assign courses to people? Should you manually have to schedule and handle the logistics of every program that you run? Obviously, we're not running a lot of instructor-led training in classrooms right now, but imagine in that world where you have to find, okay, when are we going to schedule the session based on availability of a room? Who's the right facilitator based on the topic and location? Who are the people to schedule based on all of these different things that you might still have a person working to figure out? A machine is faster at those types of ideas. A person may have to come up behind and make sure that they're making the right decisions or recommendations, but what are the different ways we can streamline and expedite the administrative side of learning and development, especially when it comes to administrating technology, that a machine is able to do? So this is something to be looking for in the near to immediate future. And you're already seeing examples of that today. An example, I scheduled a meeting with a friend of mine for next week. She forwarded my meeting request to her assistant named Evie, I believe. Evie's not a person, Evie's a bot. So Evie then worked with me to figure out when the right time was and scheduled and sent me the meeting request without my friend having to actually do anything. example, not specifically in L&D, but example of what machines can do right now with this type of technology. Let's move on to translation. This is, I think, a meaningful capability, especially given the amount of time that it takes to translate content or different solutions into different languages, the expense often related to that, and even more importantly, the ability for an employee to receive content or training in the language they provide, even if they maybe prefer a language that's not used widely in your organization. Should that hold them back from getting the best possible experience for themselves? And I would argue no. But it's been logistically difficult for us to be able to solve for that historically. This is getting close. So on screen, you see the example of Google Translate, which I think is a good bar for how good is machine learning translation right now, and it's pretty darn close. I haven't seen it completely productized in learning and development yet, but there are various companies out there, including my own, who are trying to figure out how do we automate translation through machine learning, and do it maybe not at the content developer side of the conversation. So maybe it's not you having to use a tool to translate content. Can we do it on the user's side of the equation? So like I said, instead of you having to know every language that may be necessary in your organization, can we get to a place where you don't have to? Now, the machine can take care of that and present content or coursework or questions, what have you, to the right person in the language that they prefer. So like I said, this is close. I would expect to see this type of capability in your technology in the next year plus, especially, again, if you're working with the types of companies that are really concerned about global application of solutions and the need to contextualize to people based on their specific needs in this regard. Authoring. So this is another rapidly moving development in learning and development application of machine learning technology. What you see on screen is just a simple visualization of the concept. The idea that can we feed a machine source content, so maybe PDFs or those guidebooks you've got that have all the information in it, and allow the machine to figure out what's important, right, based on what the goal is, what we're trying to accomplish with the people we're supporting, and then have the machine write the content. What you see on screen is something that my team calls content assistant. So again, this is a visualization. But the idea that you can feed the source material and the machine can figure out what's the key learning points. So what should people take away from this content? And then can we generate meaningful questions? So questions that'll help people learn, challenge their knowledge, without an instructional designer having to do that first pass of work. So to not to completely take away the instructional designer, but accelerate that first part of development, and then allow an instructional designer come up behind the machine and see and assess their work. Did they do it correctly? Did they include all the context required? There's a lot of things you might need to understand about a piece of content that's not from the source material, that's not well documented, and that's where a human instructional designer comes up behind the machine and make sure that it's good to use and then good to publish. So this, again, is a tool, type of tool that I think you'll see moving very quickly into the marketplace. There's a couple of different teams, including my own, that are using this type of technology. One thing we're using this technology to do, this might be exciting to some people who do a lot of assessment development or write a lot of questions, is we're using artificial intelligence to write distractors in multiple choice questions, because that's often one of the most time-consuming parts of writing a good question is what's a realistic distractor. And that's, again, if with the right information source content, that's something that a machine can do for us. So content authoring is another rapidly developing application of this technology in our space. Chatbot. I often can't get out of a conversation about AI without chatbots coming up. And again, on screen, you just see a simple example of what a chatbot is. But we've all probably had some version of that experience. I'd argue that most of those experiences were not great. You've probably talked to a bank, and their chatbot, can get you only so far in terms of helping point you in the right direction, maybe answer a couple of questions based on, understanding the language and what you're asking for. But this is, again, a very prevalent conversation, one of the earlier kind of products that we see in the space, because there are several providers out there that provide, chatbots for coaching or some version of chatbots for learning. And it's that ability to be able to have a conversational interaction with a machine that feels natural, that helps coach us in a particular direction, coaching being a common application. So helps remind us of certain topics or kind of keep us on task with things that we've learned recently. So again, a way to scale that type of interaction in a way that feels more personal than just automated emails and these types of things. But again, an application that's already in the marketplace that you can easily research today. One caveat, a lot of chatbots out there might not actually be artificial intelligence applications. They may be very complicated, if this, then that. So they're pre-programmed to understand if we see these certain terms or these certain keywords, we head in this direction, or we make a recommendation of this particular resource. So that is a lot of it. There may be AI underneath the covers a bit, maybe some of that natural language processing to figure out what you're looking for and then connect you to the right branch of that branching decision tree. So it's kind of a blend in some cases. Then we've got search. I use this on screen because being at home a lot right now, I've been binge watching shows, and I found myself on a bit of Ted Danson kick. I don't know why, but I watched Cheers, and then I went straight to The Good Place, which both I recommend. But I suddenly realized I was on a Ted Danson multi-week marathon. And I was like, how old is Ted Danson nowadays? So I went to Google and asked, how old is Ted Danson? And you'll notice Google didn't just give me the link to Wikipedia so I could go find that myself. It answered the question. So how many of the tools that you're using today in your workplace, like an intranet, or maybe, again, a knowledge base that you're using or it's attached to your learning technology, how many of those knowledge bases today can do that same thing? So this is an application of machine learning in terms of not just using keyword search to give you a resource recommendation based on the use of terms or tags and things like that. This is actually being able to figure out the answer to your question because the machine understood the question, scoured the internet or the source material for that answer and gave it to you. So that's what we're looking to do, and my team's doing a lot of work around advancing search to the point where it's not about helping you find a resource, it's about helping you find the answer. And again, already something we're familiar with in everyday technology. How do we bring this into our technology as well? Recommendations, another one of the more popular topics. The Netflix of learning comes up a lot when you start to talk about data and machine learning and whatnot. You see a lot of this type of capability, both in learning management systems and learning experience platforms. So it's that ability to say, based on whatever data set we have, in a lot of cases, it's you've consumed certain types of content, maybe you've liked or you've given feedback on that content, and then content that's on similar topics that's been experienced by people similar to you, and they also like that content, you might also want to watch this or consume this course, or this job aid might be relevant to you. So like I said, that's in a lot of our tools already today. What I see advancing is how do we make better use of that data to provide better recommendations? Because hopefully most of you see that the Netflix analogy has some limitations in that just because you watched this, you might also like this, is not necessarily the case, especially when you apply it to learning. Entertainment and learning are different ideas. I also don't want you to binge watch learning content. I want you to experience as little content as possible to help you accomplish your goal. That's really what I'm trying to do, so you can move on to the next thing. So when you think about Netflix, not to say anything bad about Netflix, love it. But how much data do they have about you? The data set's relatively limited. They don't know what my mood is today, or what type of content I tend to watch based on how I'm feeling, or what types of content entertains me in different ways. So how do we look at the data that we can provide, or we can access, not just about what courses people are taking, but how they're doing on the job, what kind of results they're seeing, and what type of content's actually helping people solve problems that these employees may have, connect those dots and provide more proactive and more informed recommendations along the way. So recommendations are already here, but I see it advancing as we get better with data. Coaching, we already kind of talked to. I think some of the best applications or examples of this are in the workout space in mobile applications. So you see an app on screen called Fitonic. That idea that, in this case, the application is actually looking at your form as you exercise and providing immediate feedback on how you can improve your form to get better results and not hurt yourself. So then you shift that into our space, and we see some, again, chatbot-based versions of digital coaching, but how do we take that to another level? So this is more of a research-based area. I see conversations about digital coaching, or maybe not just digital coaching, but augmenting human coaching through AI-enabled insights and recommendations to managers who are conducting those coaching conversations. But again, it really comes back to a question of data. What's the right data that we need to coach people more effectively? And it goes well beyond just the learning side of data, which we're going to dig into in a second. Personalization kind of takes recommendation to the next level. Not just, you might want to consume this content based on this previous content, but how do we start to shift more pieces of the experience so we know that the right experience for you based on your proven needs at this given time, maybe a piece of digital content, it may be a coaching experience, it may be a practice opportunity. There's a lot of different things out there and ways to help people get better at their jobs. So how do we better personalize the experience and maybe go even further to say, these features of an application may be more useful to you. The translation side feeds into this, presenting in the appropriate language based on your preference. So personalization I see as a much bigger umbrella term. But again, applying a bunch of these different capabilities to provide a more kind of holistically personalized and adapted experience for each individual, and the ability to do that at scale, which we typically have struggled with, which leads to a lot of one-size-fits-all solutions. Because if you're a mighty team of 20 and you support 100,000 people, how do you balance that kind of scale question? I think this technology is already helping us do that. And then finally, something my team, or actually two more, one of the things my team's working a lot on is, well, how can we use machine learning and artificial intelligence to advance our measurement capability? I think moving forward, now more than ever, the question of what actually works is going to be critical. So are the solutions that we're providing to employees actually doing the job and helping them move the needle forward when it comes to their performance and the goals of our organizations? Every team is held accountable for their solutions working, and I think that's going to be increasingly a conversation in learning and development. But how do we finally close that gap of, did the training actually change someone's performance and results? And there's been a gap historically, and that's going to be part of our data conversation because it requires more data. But my team's doing a lot of work around machine learning. When we get the right types of data, how do we connect learning to business results and identify what part of the business result was actually coming from training? Because we know it's not 100%, right? If you're trying to improve safety, training's doing something, the safety team's doing something, managers are doing something. So there's a lot of different influences on someone's performance. Can we use machine learning in our advanced computational and data practices to isolate the impact of training? And it's something my team's been able to do with great effectiveness. I can go in a lot more detail if you'd like to. Future, my contact information is attached. And at the end of the presentation, if you want to talk more about how does impact analysis work when it comes to artificial intelligence. And then finally, kind of extrapolate that forward. So this is something I see a couple different companies working on. Especially around the skills conversation, is how do we proactively identify what skills we are strong with in an organization, where our potential skills gaps are, and then proactively start to close those gaps or move the right solutions or right recommendations in the right direction. But again, on an aggregated kind of scale of the entire organization, so that it's not about us chasing and trying to figure out, we're falling behind as an organization. We have to radically adapt our skills and then adapt our training models and change our competency plans and all these things that really slow us down. So is there a way to use the right type of data and the right type of technology to make that connection and figure out where are the gaps? What are we going to need to be able to do moving forward, and how can we proactively address those gaps and help people develop the right skills along the way, and not be completely reactive in that regard? So another kind of exciting opportunity to use data and technology in a different way. So around all of these, that's just 10 examples. That's not meant to be everything that AI can do in workplace learning, but hopefully gives you some examples or some kind of practical ideas, or maybe some things you're already doing or you're already seeing in the tools that you're using that are starting to change the way that you approach solving these different types of problems. All of these different applications, I think, bring a different level of value based on your needs and the problems you're solving. And they're also at different places in terms of adoption, where certain industries, I think, are a little bit further along when it comes to different types of applications of AI. But generally speaking, this is where I see the marketplace, where, like I said, recommendation is something we see in a lot of technology today, but the question is, how effective is it? Personalization is something that's growing quickly. Chatbots are around a lot. That gap analysis, impact analysis idea, content authoring are still relatively new. They're being worked on, or they're just coming into the marketplace, or maybe we're just starting to explain these types of ideas to the industry, which is what I'm trying to also do today. But hopefully people are starting to see those opportunities and start to figure out, again, how can they integrate them into the practices in their organization. So we're still early in the AI conversation in L&D, but it's moving quickly, and we need to start having these conversations because, like I said, it's not a matter of deciding if we're going to apply some of these tools. They're going to start appearing or shift the way that some of our tools work. So are we ready to be able to take advantage of them? Speaking of that, are we ready for AI? Again, every team's going to be in a different place. I may be way over your head if this is brand new to you, or I may be speaking your language and you're already doing a lot of this work. So it really varies based on the team, organization, and also how far advanced are your AI practices as a company. Because a good part of the story is that L&D is probably not going to be the team that introduces artificial intelligence to the organization. It's already in play. So whether it is in your HR team, I see a lot of AI applications in talent acquisition and recruiting and being able to sort through a lot of resumes and candidates and be able to identify the right talent matched to the right skill sets. So there's a lot of applications there, but even more in the operation, right? If you have a logistics operation, if you have a marketing team, they're probably using AI-enabled technologies in some way, which represents a great resource for us to be able to learn from and work with people who are further along this curve than we are. But then the question becomes, okay, in our practices, how far along are we? And are we able to start taking advantage of these types of capabilities? And I lean on a concept from IBM called the AI ladder to answer this question. So if you think about our conversation today and this ability to apply a lot of these interesting tools as kind of the top rung of the ladder, so that's where the AI application lives, how do we climb to that point so that we can start taking advantage of some of these capabilities if they're going to help us solve the right problems? So the next rung down is the machine learning side. So the actual training of models, the preparation of technology to be able to bring that application to life. Then there's the effective organization and application of data on the analytical level. And then at the ground floor, there's the information architecture level. So actually having data organized in the right ways. And then if you look at the applications we talked about and kind of think about, okay, are we ready to climb this ladder to solve these different problems? And let's put the pieces together. You may have wondered, what was the color scheme for? So all of the different applications I showed were different colors. So there's the blue side. So that was the kind of automation of administration, translation, content authoring, chatbot search, that type of capability. I'd refer to those as software-enabled AI. They require a limited kind of information architecture to get going. So as an example, authoring tools. You don't need to necessarily have a robust data profile on your employees and your organization in order to use a machine to take source content and generate training information from it, right? It's kind of compact, kind of a narrow solution that's solving a very specific problem and requires a very specific input. And that's kind of the nature of these tools. If you have more data, they can get better, but we can start there pretty quickly without having to solve our data problems whole out. But then there's the green side. I think these are some of the more exciting, progressive, and potentially impactful side of kind of our current capabilities when it comes to AI and learning and development. And that's the kind of the scaling and automation of coaching, personalization, understanding the impact of our training, finding the gaps in our organization. I'd say these are the more software executed side that have a need for a strong information architecture. So depending on where your interest is and what problems you're trying to solve, it really comes back to that foundational layer. Before we can climb the ladder, we have to address our data issues. And unfortunately, that's been a bit of an Achilles heel in learning and development for a while now. So if you look at your organization, you might be in different places. If you think about data as a library, in a lot of organizations, the shelves are kind of empty. There might be a couple books up there that are relatively limited in topic. They might be, again, talking about course completions and attendance, satisfaction scores, some kind of basic learning-related data might be on the shelf, but the shelf is still pretty bare and it doesn't give us enough to be able to do what we're trying to do in terms of climbing the ladder. Or you may have a ton of data, right? You may have data from all different parts of the business, including what learning and development is doing. But then the question is it organized, right? Is it structured? Is it in a place where you can take advantage of it, where you can plug into that resource? And again, maybe it's not just you, it's maybe your entire organization is still trying to kind of get its mind around or its arms wrapped around the data story. Our data needs to actually look like this: very structured, very organized, collected, analyzed, and applied with purpose to then power the solutions we're trying to execute and help us climb that ladder. And the reality is, most of L&D doesn't have sufficient data to power AI. And it comes back to kind of one of the most popular things you often hear is, I can't get past level 2. Right? So if all we have is learning data and we're locked in a box with kind of these basic levels of reaction and completion data, there's only so far we can go. We can, like I said, venture into and start to apply some of these ideas, but the ones that require solid data, information architecture, we're going to have limitations until we fix the data problem. So before you get too far down the path of what can AI do for my organization, we have to have the data conversation. And that involves, one, changing the way that we design solutions. Historically, again, there's that gap I already talked to about between what we do, what we build, and the result the organization is trying to achieve. So how do we take a hard look at, again, to solve our data problem, it starts with us looking at our own practices. So how do we look at our solution design practices to say, are we setting ourselves up to be able to measure more effectively based on the solutions we're designing. And that requires a couple steps in between what we make and the goal we're trying to achieve. And it's, are we clear on the result? The result can't be safety, right? We want people to be safer on the job. That's great. But how do we measure that? When you came to me, stakeholder, with a problem, you said you need more training. How do you know you have a problem at all? How are you measuring that problem? We need to clarify on that before we move forward, then figure out what does good look like. So what behavior change is required? What are people doing on the job so that we know that we're seeing the change necessary to get to that goal? Okay, now what knowledge do I have to drive forward? What do people have to learn, right? What's the foundational knowledge required to be able to do those things? And now, what's the right solution? So this is the instructional design model my team uses to help, or solution design model is probably a better way to say it, to help clarify these pieces along the way to get to a right fit solution decision. And again, it could be a course, could be a set of questions, it could be a job aid, could be a video, could be practice activities, all different types of things we can do in our toolkit to solve that problem. But it also works in the other direction. And using this type of solution design approach is not just about designing a solution, it's actually setting ourselves up for improved measurement along the way. Because if I've clarified those different points through the design process, I can now go back and measure those points. How you're going to measure them is going to vary based on your organization and what tools and tactics you've got. But it might be as simple as saying, well, we're going to continuously assess people's knowledge and use a couple of questions to test what they know and how they're retaining that knowledge. Maybe we're going to observe people on the job or use existing observation data. If you're in a warehouse, you probably have a safety team observing data. If you're in a call center, you have call quality observation data. So how do we take advantage of that data to make sure the change is happening in performance? And then the business result data should be there if you're running a business. So how do we start to match those pieces up? So this really sets the stage to be able to improve data practices. Then how do we take a hard look, not just at our design process, but our tactics that we're using? A lot of learning and development tactics are fundamentally data poor. So event-based training, online training, in a lot of cases, we just don't get a lot of data from it, or that data is very limited in scope. It's from the occurrence of the event itself. How do we take a look at the other tactics that we use, or maybe how do we introduce tactics that give us more opportunities to collect data along the way? So that could be reinforcement activities, it could be coaching activities that take place closer to the job, it could be how people are using on-demand resources. But it's really, again, taking a look at our overall learning experience design and figuring out which tactics are data rich and data poor, and what do we have to augment? Because based on our solution design, we're going to need certain types of data. How do we get our hands on that data in a meaningful, scalable way? And then finally, I think it comes down to just fundamentally rethinking the way we think about measurement. I think a lot of our measurement models are limited today because they're very place and time oriented. They're built in a time when workplace training looked very different and was wrapped around execution of timely courses and place and time events. Now, we all know that learning is something that happens continuously, right? Whether it's something we support or not. People are constantly growing and changing and forgetting and improving their behaviors and seeing them slip in terms of bad behaviors on the job. And it's a constantly moving target. So how do we, instead of looking at measurement and data, something that's programmatic that we can schedule, it's something that's continuous and something that's continuously moving? Because again, people are always changing the way they engage, what they know, how they behave on the job, the outcomes that they see. And by thinking about data in learning as more of a continuous cycle, one, we're able to ask better questions. We're able to find, I think, more meaningful data. And then now, because we have AI-enabled technology, the ability to use data in new ways. Again, this is just a very high-level intro to that idea. But we can take advantage of that data to do different things, including a lot of the examples that I shared earlier today. But we can't get there until we fundamentally rethink the role of data, the way that we access, collect, analyze, and apply data in learning and development. That is that, again, first rung on the ladder to then climb to the more impressive and impactful applications of this technology. So as we start to wrap up or get towards the end of our chat today, what steps can you take to prepare for AI in learning and development? Like I said, it's already here. Some of you are using different tools that AI shows up in different ways to improve your experience. Even if you're building a PowerPoint and you see some of the kind of authoring support tools that are showing up in PowerPoint today, or showing up again, like I said, when you send an email, it's already embedding itself inside of our tools. But how do we get ready to take advantage of the more kind of aggressive applications to help us solve learning and development problems? Here's a set of steps I think everyone can take, regardless of how far your organization is along that journey. One, just take a look at how these tools are maybe already in play. So both in learning and development, your friends in HR, what are they doing with data and how are they applying machine learning and AI? And then, like I said, your peers and your stakeholders and the other people in your organization that are already using these types of tools, just kind of find out what they're doing, right? What journey did they take? How are they working with different technology providers? How are they working with different types of data? Because you may be able to learn a lot from them, especially if you're not able to have your own data science team or your own specialist in this regard. I'm lucky in the fact that I work with a very smart data science team that informs me on how a lot of this stuff works. So can you find similar expertise in your organization? Doing your homework. If you're watching this video, thanks. You're already doing some of it. When I first got started thinking about AI, I went to open coursework and a variety of different websites to get that foundational understanding of what is artificial intelligence, what is machine learning, what is it capable of, how should I be framing my conversation so that I can be more dangerous. I'm not an expert by any means. I'm more leaning into the application versus the development of these types of tools. So how can you do your homework to make sure you have a foundational understanding so you can have more informed conversations? Find the problems. So like I said, it's not how do we apply AI in our organization? It's what problems do we need to solve? What would provide a better experience for the people we're trying to support? And then, okay, great. Well, how could this type of technology help us solve those problems? So maybe, again, the common example, translation. Maybe that is a major hurdle in the organization you support, slowing down your ability to provide solutions in a timely way. You're not able to provide personalized or customized resources to people that could really benefit from them. Maybe that's a major hurdle. That might be an early application you want to explore and have conversations with your solution providers around how they're maybe looking at applying this type of technology. Establish a vision. So when you start to identify what the problems are, kind of take a step back and say, this is the way that we're applying, thinking about using this type of technology, again, across our practices. It's not when are we going to use AI and putting it in a box and then mobile's in a different box and e-learning's in a different box. It's how is this conversation and this capability going to inform the way we approach our work moving forward. And that's a moving target because this technology moves quickly. So how are you going to keep up with that is also part of doing your homework. But really, again, reshaping and rethinking your practices with this capability in mind, rather than putting it in a box and say, well, the chatbot is the AI tool. No, it's actually more of a fundamental piece under a lot of our technology and practices moving forward. Measurement. So how do we aggressively go after the question about how we use data in organizations? Like I said, the question of, are our solutions working? And how do we move forward with the solutions that are most impactful is going to be a critical conversation point in our industry moving forward. It already has been important for a long time now. Now we're actually able to answer those questions. And I think this conversation helps you take the next step when it comes to the measurement conversation. Partnering up, like I said, I don't expect every team to grab a hold of an AI expert of their own. I don't expect you to become an artificial intelligence expert. If you want to, or you've got those resources, cool. If you can't, who are your experts? So do you have a data science team in your company? Maybe you can have a conversation with them, start learning from their practices. If you're working with any type of a partner, whether it's a third-party consultant, a solution provider, technology companies, start having these conversations with them to learn what they're doing, right? What's on their roadmap? How are they researching and applying this type of technology? So you can be ready when these opportunities present themselves. Solving specific problems. So a lot of people might not buy into some of these ideas, might not quite get it until they see it. So rather than just talk in concept or try to present a big vision of where you're trying to go to the people that you're supporting, start solving some problems. You may have the vision, right? You may know where you're trying to go, but that's going to need to iterate based on what actually works. So how do you maybe start experimenting, take a look at one particular problem and start to address that in new ways with new types of resources, prove the value, show that it works, and then start moving forward with kind of more grand scale parts of your vision. And then evolving your role, asking that question, which I think is important for anyone in the workplace as technology advances. It's not new as related to AI specifically. It's always been the case, but making sure that we're not just thinking about this in terms of how we can use it to support people. It's also how does it fundamentally change the way we approach our work. And that's true across the board, not just if you're a content developer or an administrator or instructional designer, it's everybody. So how do you think about what this type of technology can help you do and solve problems in new ways? And then how does that reshape your role? How can a machine and data take over certain parts of the role in a way that are more scalable and faster and more proactive to allow us to focus on the things that we do best, right? Like I mentioned, with content authoring as an assistant tool, maybe you're not going to design the first pass. Maybe you don't need to build the key learning points and the learning objectives yourselves right away. Maybe now it's about kind of setting the stage for the problem you're trying to solve, getting your hands on the right resources, feeding those resources into a machine, the machine doing a first pass of content. Now you're reviewing and contextualizing that content and helping get it out the door faster. So it's a different way to approach the role rather than thinking about, well, the role is being replaced. Because generally speaking, AI can right now replace about 50% of the tasks that we do on a day-to-day basis. I use that example of my friend who's replaced scheduling meetings with an AI-enabled tool. But it can only really replace 5% of the jobs that we do in entirety. So it allows us to focus on the more human side of work and to automate or introduce smart technology to the right pieces. Like I said, this is an hour conversation. There's only so far and so deep we can go. Hopefully it's been kind of a good kind of preview or kind of introduction if this is a new conversation to you, or maybe provide some additional perspective or framework for you to think about starting to solve problems with AI-enabled tech. If you head to that URL, learngeek.co/AI, that's where I live curate any resources I can find. So different presentations, different articles that I find. And there's also a set of conversation guides there. So if you're looking to kickstart a conversation in your team, or maybe with some other members of your organization about this topic, there's some questions that you can ask to guide the conversation to, again, help move it forward. Because like I said, it might not be time to say, well, how can we use AI in our business? There might be some more pressing topics that you're looking at, but how do you just start the conversation so that when it's time to start moving in this direction and advance your practices, people are more ready to do it because the conversation's already been moving. And the last piece for me is just bringing it back to the fact that we're still talking about people. I just spent a whole lot of time talking about technology and data, but ultimately it's about solving problems and helping people do their jobs better. That's why I do this. That's why I'm in this industry. Hopefully it's the same or similar for the work that you're doing in your organization. So we have to ground it in, we're supporting people, or trying to help them do their best work. How can we help them solve their problems more effectively and advance their performance more effectively? This is a growing part of that conversation, but it's ultimately about people. So to summarize, we're late to the party, but that's okay. We've been late to other parties before. I think we're still earlier to this party than we are in some other meaningful technology parties that we're still trying to find our footing in. AI is very good at solving specific problems. It does specific things very well based on how the technology is designed to go after that particular issue, right? The machine can be programmed to say, what does a cat look like? And it identifies photos of cats. The machine cannot randomly identify any particular object that it hasn't been asked to train on, because that's not the type of technology we're talking about. This is not a machine that can act as a human. It's not the Terminator robot conversation. It's using specifically designed tools to solve specific problems. And that's why we have to start with figuring out what are the problems we're trying to solve, and then how can we leverage what technology is capable of now and into the immediate future to solve those problems. We're going to have a problem getting to the meaningful side of AI, some of the more aggressive and potentially impactful applications, before we address our measurement problems. So we really have to look internally. Like I said, look at the types of data we're collecting, look at our tactics. Are they data-rich tactics? And look at how we design solutions. And are we setting ourselves up to be able to measure how those solutions are impacting people's performance and the organization? Because if the questions we're trying to answer are our solutions working, there's only so much we can do to answer that question, even with the best tech out there, if we don't have the right data to power that information architecture. And then to fix measurement, we have to adopt more data-rich practices and more data-rich tactics, like I said. So again, looking internally to say, are we able to get our hands on the right data? And if not, how can we advance our practices to be able to do that? And then finally, don't solve this on your own. Get expert help. Ask questions, like I said, inside your organization if you have expertise there. Reaching out to providers that you're working with. I'm happy to help in any way that I can. If you have questions, you're watching this recording and you're saying, I wish I could have asked them a question, well, let's do that. So here's my contact information. Feel free to drop me a note on Twitter or drop me an email personally. If you're curious about how any of these applications specifically work in your organization, you're maybe using something right now and you're curious what type of data you should be looking for, I'm happy to help in any way that I can to inform the conversation, because my overall goal is that we don't allow AI to become a trendy or buzzworthy topic that we don't really understand the fundamentals of. We can start at the ground level, really get what this technology is capable of, what types of problems we can start to address using these types of tools as they become more and more available, and then avoid putting them in boxes. So really think about the fundamental way this can help enhance our practices and not make AI another tool we use sometimes. I think there's a lot more potential here than that. So again, feel free to drop me an email or hit me on Twitter at any point. Happy to help you out as you start your AI conversation in your organization. But yeah, that's all I've got for you today. Again, thank you for hanging out. Thanks for watching the video. Thanks, Anne and Risk, for inviting me to be part of the Learning Collective conversation here over these couple of weeks. And again, anything I could do to help advance your AI conversation in learning and development, happy to do so. And stay safe, stay well. Thanks, everybody.
Well, thank you, JD. I loved the examples that you use for the applications, because oftentimes people don't think about, oh, that's a great application for training or learning. And then the actionable steps that you outline for everyone to get started. And I think there was a question from Duncan here that may be something that you wanted to share your thoughts on. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of cool, predictive performance support.
That's the fanciest way I've ever been asked a question in an online format before. I'm very excited about the way this. I feel like I'm on a real television show. So the proactive capability is a huge consideration, right? So that's kind of when you kind of differentiate what can a person do versus what can a machine do with the right data. So someone's got to ask me for help before I'm able to help them or know that they need help, right? But if we're able to figure out, what problems are we trying to help people solve, what experiences are we trying to help provide people that can help them do their work better, and then what data can help power those experiences, we can let the machine do its work in certain regards. So as an example, some of the better, we talked about recommendation. Some of the limitations of that are it's not very proactive. It requires, well, you've taken this course, now it's like take that course. But if we can get better data in play, the right data that maybe is identifying how is people's knowledge changing, how is their behavior actually changing on the job, what do their results start to look like, and then how does the machine maybe architect that backwards to say, well, these are the types of solutions people are using to solve those problems or improve their performance in those areas. Let's make this recommendation now, or let's shift the person's experience to focus on these particular skills and do it in a way that's faster and more proactive than I could do. And I, as learning and development, never know it happened, right? Because if we're doing it at scale, I'm not watching what each person's being assigned anymore, potentially. It's happening on its own. And what's being identified to me is what's working, what's not working, where the gaps are, where we don't have solutions based on problems that are arising, and insights the machine is gathering based on this real world data. So I think it's allowing us to go in that direction quickly. The question is, how fast can we advance our data practices to get there? Because if we don't have the right data, there's only so proactive that we can get.
And that is a great point to end on, to wrap up with what you even said, that regardless of what technology tools we have, it still comes back to the people. It still comes back to how do we solve problems for people? And we can be proactive if we have good data. And how do we gather good data? It's by observing the actions that people are doing currently. So it's still about us human beings. Right. Thank you again for a wonderful presentation and session. And for those who are catching the replay, feel free to drop in your comments or questions. We'll make sure that we include the links to connect with JD easily as well, should you want to communicate with him directly. And thank you, JD, for your time and really great, wonderful insights and information today.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody, and be well.
We'll see you soon.